Hello friends, it's Kayla. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to take a look at what types of books I actually give 5 stars. A couple months back, my friend Megan made this video called a 5-star audit where she took a look at all of her 5 stars and figured out what things they had in common. For me, over the past 5 years, I have rated 200 books 5 stars, which is incredible. And in her video, she introduced me to this Goodreads page that I didn't even know existed, where you could look year to year at your rating stats. From this page, you can open up the details of any given year and see every book that you've read sorted by rating. So I can see all of my 2022 5 stars, 2021, 2020. I think we'll go back to 5 years worth because anything before 2018, I can't stand by that rating unless I reread it. I find that this screen, it's a little bit hard to see all of the titles, and also I want to be able to organize it like physically and just have the 5 stars featured. So I have this Photoshop file that I just made where everything is here and I can move and drag things. So what we're going to do is talk about the things that my favorite books have in common. I'm going to try to have 10 categories, and I can drag and drop all of the books into the categories where they fit so we have a visual. I've made videos before where I talk about my reading taste in books that I typically pick up a lot, but certain tropes that I may lean towards doesn't always lead them to being a 5-star, like books about games, books inspired by Shakespeare. But assessing my reading taste is one of my favorite things to do, so that's why I had to steal this video idea. Please check Meg's out down below. I'll also link down below Riley's. She did one also inspired by Meg, and we have some things in common, so I'm going to start out right there. One of Meg's first things was books with mixed media. I believe this to be a storytelling style I really like, so we're gonna zoom right into it and find some 5 stars with that thing and see if there is enough evidence that I do like that thing. The one that comes to mind first is House of Leaves, so we'll just pop this up here. I feel like the Wicker King would also count, so we'll pop that up. Illuminae, there's Illuminae. I kind of want to say any book with a podcast would also count. So The Night Swim is coming to mind. And then How You Lose the Time War is written in like letters. So maybe epistolary would be a better description, but we're gonna call this one mixed media. I think if I have 5 examples, I can call it a thing that I like. Epistolary stories for me often have this feeling of nostalgia because I think a lot of us got introduced to books or read a lot of books in our youth that were written as like diary entries, and you got really in the mind of a main character. So whether it's diary entries or documents or audio files, podcasts, whatever it is, I just think that books of this nature, I'm trying not to flip to a spoiler, House of Leaves, but there's just interesting things to look at. And as somebody who often likes low plot books and confusing books, I'm down to go off on random tangents and not understand why certain documents are being included or why this piece of dialogue is going to matter later. I just think it really keeps things interesting and has something to look at constantly. So this one, like, the story visually gets more messy as the book progresses. And as far as my TBR, I thought I would highlight a couple things that I want to read that I think are in each of these categories. So episode 13 by DiLouie is, I think, transcripts from this horror thriller ghost hunting TV show. And then I've heard a lot about this book called The Appeal. I just need someone to convince me that I will like it. I think it is court documents. For category number 2, I think it's something that's in line with mixed media a lot of the time, and it's books about books, books related to books, books with authors as main characters. I know there is quite a few of these. Just last year, even Jameela Green Ruins Everything. She's an author. The Book of the Most Precious Substance. She works in rare book dealing. The Pallbearers Club is also an author. It's written as a memoir, so that kind of feels mixed media too. Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel. That one is about an author. Finlay Donovan is killing it, naturally. Wonder which category is going to be the most stacked. Oh, Kindred is also technically about an author. It also has to do with time travel. Should that be one of my categories? I don't know yet. Erotic stories for Punjabi widows. This one's a 4.5, 7 days in June, but that's another reason I wanted to do this in here rather than Goodreads, because there's some 4.5s that I think should count in my 5-star area. 8 Perfect Murders because he works in a bookstore. Book related books, because it's not all books about other books, but there is bookish conversations within it. Naturally, as readers, we like books, and so liking books about books is not a shocking thing, but it can be about the art of storytelling itself as a plot point that I enjoy. And I definitely like this regardless of genre. thrillers, mysteries, romance, if you have an author as a main character who's just talking about the craft of writing. I have no personal interest in being an author of fiction, but I love following authors. And I think I just love following characters who have a passion for something and talk about that passion for their work. I think of it like a lot of people who love film. They love watching films about making films, about famous actors. Some books on my physical TBR in this vein are Kill Creek by Scott Thomas, 12 Nights at Rotter House by J.W. Ocker, and Gnarled Hollow by Charlotte Green, which all are similarly about an author who goes into a haunted or just odd house and is finding inspiration for their writing. And then of course, The Writing Retreat, which is an upcoming Literally Dead Book Club selection. I'm so excited to read. It's about a bunch of authors who come together in a house. Oh, and there's also The Last Word by Taylor Adams, which is about an author who goes after a bad reviewer. And then The Neighbor Favor for romance is about somebody who lives next to a famous author, or they're both authors. I don't perfectly remember, but I know that's the vibe, by Christina Forrest. Now, something that Riley had on her list that I also want to add to mine, I think is Portal Fantasy, though I don't know I have enough examples to really call it, but I recently read Finna, so I'll pop that in here. The Every Heart a Doorway series is what introduced me to Portal Fantasy. Well, maybe not introduced me, but as an adult introduced me. I mean, we had things like Narnia. I know Riley also mentioned like Alice in Wonderland. I still haven't read that one, and I probably should. Oh, and then I need to find The Hollow Places, because that's another one Riley had on her list for Portal Fantasy. And I think that might be it, though. Could we call 11/22/63 Portal Fantasy? Okay, well, Goodreads just informed me that was actually a 2016 read. So even though I just said I can't stand by it, I think I'm putting it in here. And then if I pulled Kindred into here, we could call it like Portal Fantasy Time Travel. Because I guess I don't have enough to actually fulfill either one of those categories. But I do think this is something I love, and I just haven't read enough of it. Although, maybe we could rename this Plays with Time, because technically the portal worlds, they do play with time, and then time travel also fits. And then we could pull in Neverworld Wake, which is like a time loop. I love a time loop. Now that I switched it to that, I wonder if there's more that I could find that play with time. You know what? There is actually a couple, but they might be spoilers to what the book is. So maybe I don't want to do that. Although the Midnight Library, that's more about living different lives. And I think I could actually have a different category where we kind of talk about that. The thing with this type of sci-fi is I haven't read a ton of it, and the ones that get recommended tend to be YA or romance or like epic moving stories, and I more so just want silly game-centric stories, because often when there's time travel or you're going to a portal, there's a list of tasks to accomplish. You have a mission to complete. There's a maze or a puzzle or something that the character is having to figure out, and I find that really fun to follow. Naturally, as all the books that I've read are kind of in a different vein, the ones on my TBR are as well, but I have Wrong Place, Wrong Time by Gillian McAllister, which is about a woman reliving the same day over and over again, I think. And Fairy Tale by Stephen King is Portal Fantasy, so I feel like this might be a win for me. Also, I had recently recommended Una Out of Order, which is I think a time travel story where she is coming into her life at different moments and has to like organize her life. I don't know. And then I know I have Electric Kingdom somewhere in the TBR closet, which clearly looks like a portal story. Category 4, I'm going to call preemptively, because I know I can find things in here that have to do with death. And that's going to sound a little bit morbid. And like, sure, a lot of books have to do with death. Like all the thrillers I read are about somebody dying and then finding out who killed that person. But I'm more talking like how Mrs. Death is death being the narrator of the story. Or Sign Here, which was a high 4 for me, being about like hell and somebody working in hell and waiting for the next person to sign over their life. Then we can pop the Midnight Library into there as well, because it has to do with the decision to die and living different versions of your own life to see like what kind of life you could have had. I don't know how to better explain this category, like quirky stories to do with death. Addie LaRue feels like it would be something that fits into here really well, where she can't die. Even the Raven cycle, which has to do with someone's imminent death and trying to prevent their death. Alatsaway, which is about talking to the dead. Watch Over Me by Nina LaCour also has the dead as main characters. Maybe the 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, because it's about solving a death, but also it plays with time. When the reckoning comes, like that's a more traditional ghost story. And I guess How High We Go in the Dark could also fit there because it's about the end of the world and people dying. I wouldn't really say I have an interest in death, but what I find is a lot of books that I enjoy have themes around death, which makes sense. And I like when they have weird perspectives or just interesting commentary, unique narrative styles. Ordinary Monsters by J.M. Miro is on my TBR, and I think this is about a group of characters with abilities, but I'm sure death or immortality is a theme within it. From what I've heard, I also have We Sold Our Souls by Grady Hendrix, which just by the title alone, I think fits in the vibe of death and hell. And then I have The Dead Romantics, which it's got dead in the title. And it's about an author. I don't know that I knew that, but I do know there's a ghost. Now category 5, I already know what it is because I can see a lot of things that are left here. But How High We Go in the Dark is gonna move down because apocalypse, me trying to spell, not just apocalypse stories. I used the term recently, non-urgent apocalypse. And I think if we do look at a lot of my favorite end of the world stories, it's the ones that are more mundane. Severance, The Children's Bible, Leave the World Behind, The Cabin at the End of the World, Moon of the Crusted Snow. Oh, also The Dreamers. I just saw that one. My stack of apocalyptic fiction is no doubt the largest here, and it doesn't all fit within the low urgency vibe. So I would just say I like apocalyptic stories, but I usually don't want the apocalypse. Like when I was growing up, books about the apocalypse were like an alien apocalypse, a zombie apocalypse, and it was the end of the world and fighting and battling and war. But what I tend to like is more, it's the end of the world as we know it type stories. It leaves room for considering what's going on, a lot of questions, a lot of existential ponderings. Power goes out, 2 girls are alone in the forest. How are they going to survive? An indigenous community, the power goes out and they get infiltrated. A family's alone in a cabin and people show up saying that the world is ending and bad things are about to happen. I don't know how this one snuck into my stack. I love commentary on the planet and society, and as for my TBR, there is the sequel to this one, Hunting by Stars by Sherry Demeline, which I'm sure I'll get around to, but also just a lot of books seem to have this vibe naturally. We're in our own pandemic situation, so authors are integrating that into stories. I think The Drift follows a bunch of people and they all are encountering an illness in different scenarios. It says it's about a snowstorm, but it also says it's dystopian, so I'm just making the connections. Also on my TBR is Black Tide by Casey Jones, which I think follows 2 people when the apocalypse is beginning and they have to survive. I keep passing by all of these nonfiction books and trying to figure out like how I could categorize them. Men We've Reaped and Between the World and Me, Disfigured and The Skin We're In, Eating Animals, Cosmos. I think something I've talked about before with nonfiction is that I like it when it's a mix of personal anecdotes and like teaching something. Informative memoir? Let's go with that. Books that are pure memoir and books that are pure nonfiction textbook style aren't what appeal to me. I like when there is a mix. So Eating Animals has to do with Jonathan Safran Foer's own history with eating animals, his perspective, but also talks a lot about the meat industry. In The Disordered Cosmos by Chandra Prescott Weinstein, she is talking about her journey through this career path, and also is talking about dark matter and particle physics. And I like to learn while learning about an author's life experience, but it needs to be the perfect mashup. And I just really appreciate when an author can keep your attention in that way. Two books that come to mind on my TBR are Two Trees Make a Forest by Jessica J. Lee, which is about her own family's past and also the history of Taiwan. And then Call Me Indian by Fred Saskamoose is about his experience in the NHL as an Indigenous player, and also the Indigenous relationship with Canada and politics. I'm sure a lot of memoirs actually have this balance. I just wouldn't know about it until it's directly recommended or once I've read it. Let's look back at the big picture now. I'm sure there are things that could fit in the categories I've already established, but something that's coming to mind in a way that I can explain my preference for like weirder lit fic or horror that doesn't feel horror is I love stories about obsession. So we could pull Migrations down here, and Once There Were Wolves, obsessions with nature and the future of the world. Death in Her Hands, the obsession with this mystery. The House at the Bottom of a Lake, obviously, it's their obsession with the house that drives them to continue going underwater. My Heart is a Chainsaw. I think I made this realization with Alice's Island. Daphne is about the obsession of not thinking about Daphne. Woman Eating, I think you could even call Middle Game a story of obsession. I mean, House of Leaves, no doubt fits really well here as well. And then the Pallbearers Club and the Book of the Most Precious Substance. I feel like a lot of people talk about enjoying unhinged main characters, especially recently, and I completely agree. But I love when the character has a passion and the book has a singular focus. And for me and my preferences, I think what this does is allow the book to have a goal, but can then go without having much of a plot. So we're very internally focused on building this horror movie around the main character, very much focused on this woman finding out the truth about what her husband was up to before he died. And these types of stories are often very internal monologue heavy, stream of consciousness. They have one desire throughout the entire book, and I just find that fascinating to follow. I love how we're finding places for all of these things to belong. I love the organization of it all. Category 8. I feel like this is almost a cop-out because this is such a staple for most books. It's like saying, oh, I love books that have conflict, like that's every book. But I already know I'm gonna have a ton of books that I could call somebody being thrown into unfamiliar circumstances. I talked about this recently when I reread, recently 2 years ago, with The Undomestic Goddess. That was one of my first, I guess, introductions to this idea. I want to call this category mistaken identity, but I don't think I have enough mistaken identity books. But the idea is just somebody thrown in a completely unfamiliar situation and just having to roll with the punches. I find that so fun. I could also pull The Midnight Library down here. As she's living these alternate realities, she just pops up somewhere, doesn't know how she got there, and just has to go along with it, which is just very fun to read. I would say House of Hunger does that as well, because she is introduced to a new society, a new role. In Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead, that is a mistaken identity one where someone thinks she's there for a job interview. Like, that's my favorite setup, where you're just doing something else and someone's like, oh, hey, you're here for an interview. That's The Undomestic Goddess too. And the person has like nothing else going on in their life that they just go along with it. I would also say Lock Every Door and The Turn of the Key. Maybe that's why those are two of my favorite thrillers, is because they have that idea of being responsible for this house, these children that they are completely unfamiliar with, and they just have to figure it out. I would then also say that's true with my most recent 5-star Nothing to See Here, because she is now in charge of these children and has to stop them from spontaneously combusting. I think also Bunny, we could call that. That's also one that Finlay, Donovan, and Jameela Green would fit into. I think part of it for me is also like somebody finding their purpose. Maybe it's just that it appeals to the Aries in me, the Enneagram 8, but I just love people in real life and in fiction realizing that they're more capable than they thought and that they can figure out the scenario that they've been thrown into. But also the thing about this is I often, like sometimes it's okay, but I often don't want it to be that sentimental and moving kind of story. I want it to be wacky, or I want it to be genre fiction. This woman gets caught up in a murder for hire scheme. This woman is responsible for making these children not catch on fire. And I'm also a little specific with it because I often don't want it to be stolen identity. I don't want it to be from a malicious intent. I want it to be an accident, but then they just like stumble on into it. I have no doubt a ton of books on my TBR have this, but I think The Spite House might be that for me. This man just having to care for this house, but also his daughters, write down all of the paranormal things that go on. I think it'll be that perfect mix of being thrown into a scenario and also horror. Category 9, what I'm noticing is a lot of my favorite queer books follow women, and they follow female-female relationships or even female-female friendship at any cost. Like Wilder Girls, even though they're in this difficult circumstance, like their friendship and their relationship is something that makes them want to continue on. Girls of Paper and Fire, these two women are both consorts. So even in the most dire circumstances, love prevails, I think is the theme. Summer of Salt, Girls Burn Brighter, Our Wives Under the Sea is a good one for that. Maybe even Sorrowland would fit for that. Oh, most recently, The Stars and the Blackness Between Them. Women's love prevails. Now, obviously, in many times in history, many places in the world, women cannot be together publicly. And it wasn't in the not so distant past that you couldn't even find books that had this. I did not grow up with queer women in my stories. So whether it be bigotry or illness or a fantastical world that we're in that's keeping these women apart, I love seeing them go through whatever they have to be together. I'm not sure if Last Night at the Telegraph Club by Melinda Lowe has those vibes, but I'm excited to read this regardless. And then I have this one book on my TBR called Even Though We Knew the End that I'm excited to pick up and give a read. Again, recommendations very welcome down below. And then I technically only have one category left and a lot of other things here. I have a couple of things that I can think of, so maybe I need to have 12 categories, but they are going to be my smallest categories, but just things that I think I need to read more of. So category 10, I'm gonna call fake dating. I didn't want this whole thing to be like tropes specifically, but this one is definitely one I can't deny. Right here, we've got Honey and Spice, we've got The Wedding Crasher, we've got The Bodyguard. Discovering what I love in romance, like fake dating is an undeniable one for me, but it also exists in like A Curious Beginning. And then also if I look back at 2020, The Beautiful Ones by Sylvia Moreno Garcia also has like a fake relationship, marriage of convenience vibe. Oh, and then we've also got a YA in here with Hani and Ishu's Guide to Fake Dating. I find a lot of people enjoy this trope, so finding recommendations is not difficult, mostly for romance books though. And obviously this is a romantic trope, but I am looking for more fantasy that has this, adult fantasy. And I'll tell you exactly why I love it. I think there's just something so great about two people who think they know themselves so well that they couldn't possibly be interested in the other person. They don't think anybody wants them. They think signing this contract and making this deal, that they know exactly what they're doing, they know exactly who they are, and then their own perception of themselves gets challenged throughout the story. I guess it's another like love persevering thing, like your connection is so strong that you cannot deny your feelings for somebody. I just think that's so beautiful. The two books I have on my TBR are adult romance, but Happy Place by Emily Henry, two people who broke up but have to pretend to be together still is on my radar, and then Two Wrongs Make a Right by Chloe Leese, which is just two people, they get set up on a date and they're fake dating for revenge. I think that's going to be a lot of fun. And then something else that I see for category 11 is already down here, and it's wedding related stories. So like The Wedding Crasher, weddings. I don't know why I'm so into weddings, but I really am regardless of genre. So like, I like it when it's romance. Sweet Hand revolves around two characters and they're helping their friends get ready for their wedding and they fall in love while that's happening. But then I also love it with a mystery and thriller. So Happy for You is about a wedding party leading up to a wedding. You're Invited. And then probably one of the first wedding related thrillers I read was the guest list right here. Oh, Dial A for Aunties. That's another one. They work in the wedding business, so the whole thing takes place pretty much on a wedding weekend. Jackal kicks off at a wedding. My favorite movies are often ones that lead to a big event. I feel like that's a pretty classic thing that you experience in movies. It ends with a prom or a concert. The characters are working to attend something. So I just love when a book leads up to a wedding. It can be ghosts and revenge, and is the wedding even going to go through? Or it can be two people just helping the bride and groom get prepared for the big day. Especially if it has multiple POVs, like you're following an entire wedding party. I find that so fun. So an example on my TBR of that is One of the Girls by Lucy Clark, a wedding party, multiple POVs. And then also a Holly Jolly Diwali, I think, ends with a wedding, or maybe the wedding is just when they have their initial moment, which is the same with The Wedding Crasher, and I love that one. I'm sure there are things here that are just anomalies and don't fit into any other categories, but also ones that I'm just not realizing in the moment that would fit. But something I'm noticing a lot is all of my short story collections and anthologies, and I don't think that there is a specific theme that I'm looking for at all. I just know that I love short stories, and a lot of the things in here that aren't collections are actually just standalone short stories. But what I want to say, and what I think I could categorize here as my last one, is books that are well organized. And I'll try to grab things that aren't short story collections because obviously those are inherently organized. So I'm doing The One by John Mars. I'm also inclined to grab 8 Perfect Murders again from Peter Swanson. The Evelyn Hardcastle book, again, as an example. And then just imagine this entire category is filled with all the short story collections, and we're gonna call it organized lists. I need to read more in this category for sure, which is why I want to include it. What I would say these books have in common here is that you can anticipate what's going to happen. So in The One by John Mars, you have a variety of couples, and they're all like going through the same thing. They're all choosing to take this DNA test, or they've taken this DNA test to see if they're compatible, like who their perfect match is. So each chapter follows each of the couples, and it's a very organized story. And then in 8 Perfect Murders, there's a list of like all of the 8 perfect murders in fiction. And the murderer in the story is going through the list one by one. So the book follows the journey of going through the list, so you can anticipate what's gonna happen. And then in The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, along with a lot of time loop kind of stories that I'm sure I could pull, there's often a countdown, or you only have a certain amount of tries. So it's like you can go into all of these different bodies, and we know that the book is going to end once she's gone through, or once the character is going to exist in all of the different bodies before they solve this crime. Or in Neverworld Wake, I feel like there's only a certain amount of tries that they get to relive the same day. There's just something really satisfying about following a list or involving a countdown. I feel like this was kicked off with reading things like The Selection and The Hunger Games, where you start with a certain number of people and you know they're going to be picked off one by one, kicked out of the competition, and there's a certain type of storytelling that you can anticipate, and I find it really satisfying. Like in 6 Stories, you know there's going to be 6 episodes of a podcast, so you know what to anticipate, and then because you're following that clear line of story, there is moments that are going to be shocking in between that you didn't see coming because you were following such a strict list. I love being caught off guard in that way. I don't know that I have any books that I know have this style because it's not really easy to Google or find a Goodreads list of, but I do think Una Out of Order, maybe she has a certain amount of lives or a certain amount of chances to accomplish whatever she has to accomplish. I'm definitely on the lookout for stories like that though, so help me out in the comments. So I guess these are just 12 categories that I felt like mentioning this time that a lot of my favorite books land in. And not even that I pick them up a ton, but every time I do pick them up, I give them high ratings. Maybe there's the opportunity here for you to recommend me some things. Maybe you learned about some things. If I organize them in this way, maybe you wouldn't have related certain books to other books that maybe you can enjoy if you've loved something in any of these beautiful orange boxes. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon. Bye.